I remember it like it was yesterday. The moment that turned my world upside down and left me questioning everything I thought I knew about love, trust and loyalty. I'd never imagined that the person I loved most could betray me in the worst way possible. But sometimes, life has a twisted way of revealing the truth, and that night, I was about to find out just how twisted it could be. It was a Tuesday evening, nothing out of the ordinary, and I decided to surprise my wife by coming home early. We'd both been busy with work, and I thought, why not add a bit of romance back into our lives? She was everything to me, or so I thought. I'd planned to stop by her favorite bakery on the way, pick up some of those pastries she loved, and maybe open a bottle of wine when I got home. I'd been looking forward to a quiet evening together, just her and me, unwinding, catching up, reconnecting. But as I walked through the door, pastries in hand, I noticed something strange. The house was too quiet. I didn't hear the usual sounds, no TV, no faint hum of music, just silence. I called her name, expecting to hear her voice from the kitchen or the living room, but there was no response. The air felt tense, like something was off, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. Then, faintly, I heard voices coming from the bedroom. At first I thought I was imagining things, maybe she was on a call. But as I got closer, my heart started pounding. Something didn't feel right. The voices became clearer, a man's voice, low and unmistakable, mingling with hers, their words indistinct but the meaning all too clear. A part of me wanted to turn around, to leave and pretend I hadn't heard anything. But another part of me, one that felt a surge of anger, hurt and disbelief, pushed me forward. I stood outside our bedroom door, frozen. My mind raced, 1,000 thoughts and questions flooding in. How long had this been going on? Had she felt no guilt, no shame? I felt my heart pounding, my fists clenching. Every happy memory we'd shared seemed to shatter in that moment, replaced by a feeling of pure betrayal. She had no idea I was standing just a few feet away, hearing everything. I took a deep breath and steadied myself. This was no longer a surprise romantic evening, it was something much darker. I'd never imagined myself in this situation, but there I was, standing in my own home, hearing my wife with another man. The shock was unbearable, but a newfound resolve surged within me. One thing was clear: she was about to learn a lesson she'd never forget. I stood there, frozen in shock, as the reality of what was happening in my own home began to sink in. Just a few minutes ago, I'd been thinking about surprising her, about rekindling the spark in our relationship. Funny how life can turn so suddenly, from warmth and love to cold betrayal. I'd believed we had something real, something worth fighting for. I'd poured my heart and soul into our marriage, but as I listened to the muffled voices in our bedroom, every ounce of that belief seemed to crumble. It was hard to process. The woman I'd built my life with, the one I trusted above all else, was in our room with another man. We had met 6 years ago, and from the moment I saw her, I was hooked. Her laugh, her energy, the way she could light up a room, it all drew me in. We'd shared dreams, made promises, built a life. And in return, I'd given her all the love and loyalty I had. There wasn't a single moment I doubted her. But now, all of that felt like a lie. Every memory flashed before me as I stood there, gripping the bag of pastries I'd bought her. Weekend getaways, lazy Sunday mornings, the way we'd laugh over the smallest things. It all felt meaningless now, tainted by the knowledge of what she was doing behind my back. I was angry, yes, but more than that, I was hurt. The kind of hurt that digs deep, leaving wounds that don't heal easily. I wanted to turn away, walk out of that house, and never look back. But a part of me refused to let her off that easily. I needed to know why. I needed answers. Taking a steadying breath, I knocked on the door, not too hard, just loud enough to break their little moment. The voices stopped, and I heard a flurry of movement inside. I could imagine the panic in her eyes, the rush to cover up what she was doing. After a few tense seconds, she opened the door, her face flushed, her hair disheveled. She looked at me, wide-eyed, her mouth opening and closing as if she were searching for the right words. "Hey, you're home early," she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. The man behind her tried to slip out discreetly, but I stopped him with a glare that could have frozen fire. I wasn't going to let him slip away unscathed. He met my gaze for a second, then looked down, his guilt written all over his face. Pathetic. He didn't say a word, just gathered his things and hurried out, leaving my wife and me standing there, the silence heavy and bitter. I looked at her, really looked at her, trying to understand how the person I loved could betray me like this. My mind raced with questions, each one louder than the last. How long had this been going on? Why didn't she talk to me if she was unhappy? Had I missed the signs? I felt anger bubbling up inside, mixing with a sadness I couldn't shake. This was the woman I'd planned my life around, the one I trusted to be by my side. And here she was, her eyes darting around, unable to meet my gaze, looking as guilty as she deserved to feel. Finally I broke the silence. "So, this is what you've been doing while I've been working to make our lives better." My voice came out colder than I'd intended, but I didn't care. She opened her mouth, trying to find some explanation, some excuse. It's not what you think," she managed, her voice trembling. I laughed bitterly. "Not what I think? How many times have we heard those words in movies, in books? But this wasn't a story, this was my life, my marriage, and she had ripped it apart without a second thought." "Save it," I said, cutting her off. "I don't want your excuses, I want the truth." How long? My question hung in the air, the weight of it pressing down on us both. She shifted uncomfortably, biting her lip, as if somehow that would make it all go away. "A few months," she mumbled, her voice so soft I almost missed it. A few months. She'd been lying to me, sneaking around, betraying me for months, and here I was, left to pick up the pieces of the life I thought we'd built together. I felt a strange calm wash over me. This wasn't sadness or anger anymore, it was clarity. I realized, in that moment, that this wasn't just about her affair. This was about the disrespect, the deception, the choice she made every single day to betray me. And as much as it hurt, I knew what I had to do. I was going to teach her a lesson she'd never forget. She thought she could play me, take advantage of my trust, and walk away unscathed. But she was about to learn that actions have consequences, and some wounds don't heal so easily. The moment her confession slipped from her lips soft, barely above a whisper, it hit me like a tidal wave, knocking the breath right out of my lungs. "A few months," she had said. Just 2 words, but they carried enough weight to crush everything we had built over the years. I stood there, listening to her flimsy admission, feeling my chest tighten and my hands curl into fists. How could she have done this? How could the person I devoted myself to betray me so easily, so thoughtlessly, and with such little regard for the life we'd built together? Every corner of this house, the one we'd made our home, suddenly felt like a mockery, tainted with her betrayal. The laughter we once shared here, the late-night conversations, the moments I thought were precious, all of it felt tainted, like a sick joke that only she had been in on. The images of those happy memories flipped through my mind, each one now a painful reminder of her deception. I could feel the hurt clawing at me from the inside, a hurt so deep it left me breathless. But as I stood there, facing her down, something unexpected bubbled up from within, a calm, icy resolve. I wasn't going to let her walk away from this unscathed. No, she was about to feel every ounce of pain she had inflicted on me. If she thought she could deceive me, then she would learn just how wrong she was. The look on her face, the guilt in her eyes, only fueled my determination. "You're really not going to look me in the eye, are you?" I asked, each word laced with bitterness. She flinched at the question, her gaze dropping to the floor, avoiding me completely. The way she cowered under the weight of her own guilt almost made me laugh. Here was the woman who had so boldly betrayed me, now too cowardly to face the consequences. I let out a short, humorless laugh. "It's funny, really. I thought you were someone I could trust. I thought you were different." I shook my head slowly, my voice a mixture of anger and disappointment. Her face went pale, and I could see her struggling to find something, anything that would make this better. But nothing she could say would change the fact that she had destroyed the trust we once shared. The silence stretched between us, thick and heavy. She opened her mouth as if to explain, but I cut her off, holding up a hand. "Don't," I said, my tone sharp and unforgiving. "I don't want to hear your excuses. You had your chance to be honest, and you chose this." I could see her eyes darting around, searching for an escape from the judgment in my gaze. But there was no escape, not from this. She was going to face every single consequence of her actions, and she was going to learn just how deeply she had hurt me. The realization of what I needed to do hit me like a wave, and with each passing second, my resolve only grew stronger. Without another word, I turned and left the room, the echoes of my footsteps ringing through the silent house. She tried calling after me, her voice laced with desperation, but I ignored her. I had a plan to put into motion, a plan that would ensure she would never forget this night. As I stepped outside, the cool evening air hit my face, grounding me. This was no longer about the pain she had caused me. This was about teaching her a lesson she would carry with her for the rest of her life. As I walked out, I felt a strange sense of clarity. The anger was still there, raw and pulsing, but it had settled into something sharper, more focused. This wasn't just about what she'd done, it was about what I was going to do. I had trusted her completely, built a life around that trust, and she had taken it for granted, throwing it all away for a fleeting thrill. She had made her choice, and now it was my turn to decide how this story would end. I took a deep breath, my mind racing with possibilities. There were so many ways to make her feel the weight of her betrayal, so many ways to show her that actions had consequences. I'd never been the type to seek revenge, but this was different. This was personal. She needed to understand what she had done, to feel every ounce of the hurt she had caused. The first step was simple: gather evidence. I wanted proof of her betrayal, something undeniable that would force her to face the reality of her actions. If she thought she could deny it, if she thought there was a way out, she was sorely mistaken. I needed to make sure there was no escape, no way for her to twist the story or play the victim. Over the next few days, I started piecing together the evidence. I went through her messages, her emails, even her social media accounts, looking for anything that would confirm what I already knew. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for. There were texts, late-night calls, photos, small, incriminating details that painted a clear picture of her betrayal. Each piece of evidence felt like a dagger, twisting deeper into the wound, but I pushed through the pain. This was necessary. Once I had everything, I began planning the confrontation. I wanted it to be unforgettable, something that would leave a lasting impression. I thought about the moments she had lied to my face, the nights she had come home late with flimsy excuses, the times she had acted distant and distracted. All those moments made sense now, and each one fueled my determination to make her face the truth. The night of the confrontation arrived sooner than I had expected. I had rehearsed the scenario in my mind countless times, imagining the look on her face, the way she would try to squirm out of it. But now that the moment was here, I felt an eerie calm settle over me. I was ready. She walked into the house, completely unaware of what was about to happen. I watched her, noting the casual way she moved, the way she seemed so at ease. It was almost laughable, really, how comfortable she was in her deception. But that comfort was about to be shattered. "Can we talk?" I asked, my voice steady, betraying none of the storm raging inside me. She looked at me, surprised, but nodded, following me into the living room. I gestured for her to sit down, and she did, her eyes searching my face as if trying to read my thoughts. "What's going on?" she asked, her tone light, almost dismissive. It was clear she didn't suspect a thing, not yet. I took a seat across from her, pulling out my phone and opening the folder where I had saved all the evidence. Without saying a word, I handed her the phone, letting her see the messages, the photos, the proof of her betrayal. Her face went pale as she scrolled through the images, her hands shaking slightly. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with shock and fear. "Care to explain?" I asked, my voice cold, detached. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. She looked down at the phone again, as if hoping the images would disappear, that this was all some terrible dream. But it wasn't a dream. This was real, and there was no escaping it. I don't know what to say," she finally managed, her voice barely a whisper. "Try the truth," I replied, leaning back, watching her squirm under the weight of her guilt. "How long has this been going on? How many lies have you told me?" She stammered, struggling to find the right words, but there were none. She knew it, and I knew it. There was no explanation that could undo what she had done, no excuse that could erase the betrayal. "Do you even understand what you've done?" I continued, my voice rising, the anger I had kept bottled up now spilling over. "Do you have any idea what it feels like to be lied to be treated like a fool?" She looked down, her face a mask of shame and regret, but I felt no sympathy. She had made her choice, and now she was facing the consequences. This wasn't about forgiveness. This was about making her see the damage she had caused, about showing her that her actions had real, lasting repercussions. I stood up, pacing the room, my mind racing. Part of me wanted to scream, to let out all the hurt and anger I had kept inside, but I knew that would only give her more power, more satisfaction. Instead, I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "You know what I said," turning to face her. I'm done with your lies, your games, all of it. I'm not going to waste any more of my time on someone who doesn't value me, or what we had." She looked up, her eyes wide with fear and desperation. "Please," she whispered, reaching out as if to stop me. I can explain." I laughed, a bitter, hollow sound that echoed through the room. "Explain? You think there's anything you can say that would make this better? You think a few words can erase the months of lies, the betrayal, the hurt?" She shrank back, realizing the futility of her attempt. I watched her, feeling a strange sense of satisfaction as she struggled to come to terms with the reality of what she had done. She had taken me for granted, thinking I would always be there, always willing to forgive, but she was wrong. Without another word, I turned and walked out, leaving her alone in the silence, her world crashing down around her. As I left her sitting there, stunned and defeated, I could feel the weight lifting from my shoulders. But the calm I'd gained didn't mean I was finished, not yet. This was just the beginning. The first taste of the consequences that would follow, each one more deliberate than the last. In the days that followed, I distanced myself from her completely, as if she were a stranger in our own home. She tried to approach me, her eyes pleading, her voice soft as she attempted to reach out, but I turned away every time. I wanted her to feel the emptiness she'd created, the isolation, the loss of warmth and connection that she had shattered. Let her sit with that silence, let it gnaw at her the way her betrayal had gnawed at me. One evening, she finally mustered up the courage to speak. She caught me in the hallway, her hand lightly touching my arm. "Can we talk?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. I looked down at her hand, the touch that had once felt comforting now feeling like a reminder of all the lies she had told. "What could you possibly say that I haven't already heard?" I replied, my tone cold, a harsh edge to my words. Her face fell, and I saw the flicker of despair in her eyes. But this was just the beginning of the reality check she would have to face. "Please. I know I messed up," she said, her voice trembling. "But can we try to fix this?" "Fix this?" I echoed, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. "You think there's some magic fix for betrayal? For the months you spent lying to me, sneaking around, pretending like everything was normal." She looked away, the shame evident on her face. I could tell she wanted to explain herself, to try to excuse her behavior, but I didn't give her the chance. She had lost that privilege the moment she chose to betray me. Over the next few weeks, I took back every part of my life that she had touched. I changed the locks, removed her access to our shared accounts, and even distanced myself from mutual friends. She had taken my trust for granted, assumed it would always be there. Now she was beginning to understand what it felt like to lose everything, bit by bit. Each day, I watched her sink further into regret, her eyes hollow, her voice weak. She was living in the aftermath of her choices, forced to confront the reality she had created. I didn't feel sorry for her. I had given her every chance, every piece of myself, and she had thrown it all away. This was her burden to carry now, and I had no intention of easing it. One evening, as I sat alone in the quiet of what was once our home, I realized I felt something I hadn't expected: closure. She had been the one to betray, to deceive, but I had taken back control. I had shown her that actions have consequences, that betrayal is a choice with a price. And now, for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I felt free. Once the initial shock and pain of betrayal had subsided, I was left with a singular focus, making her feel every ounce of what I'd felt. She thought she could betray me and walk away without consequences, but she was wrong. This was no longer just about what she had done, it was about what I was going to do. The plan began forming in my mind almost immediately, each detail sharper than the last. This was going to be a meticulous process, carefully executed and precise. I didn't want any loose ends, no room for her to play the victim or escape the impact of her choices. She had taken my trust, my love, and twisted it into something ugly and hollow. Now, she would experience the same emptiness she had left me with. Step 1 was creating distance. I withdrew, cutting off the warmth and familiarity that she had come to rely on. Every time she tried to talk to me, to bridge the gap that now yawned between us, I remained silent, unmoved. She would feel the absence of my support, the loneliness of her own choices. Next, I began subtly reclaiming control over our shared life. Financially, I started moving assets around, pulling my support from joint accounts, and setting up my finances independently. She wouldn't notice at first, not until the impact became undeniable. I removed her access to the life we had built together, leaving her isolated and financially vulnerable. If she thought she could break trust and continue as though nothing had happened, she was about to be proven very, very wrong. I went through our social circles too, quietly sharing hints of what had happened. Not enough to ruin her, not yet, but enough to plant seeds of doubt among our friends. I made sure to remain calm and composed, playing the role of the dignified spouse who had been wronged. She didn't know it yet, but her world was already beginning to unravel. As each day passed, I watched her with an unspoken satisfaction. She was confused, unsure of what was happening, why I had become distant, cold. Her messages became more desperate, her attempts to reconnect increasingly frantic. She tried to play innocent, to downplay her actions, but I wasn't interested in excuses. This wasn't a game where she could shift the blame or talk her way out. This was a carefully laid path, one that would end with her facing the full weight of her actions. One evening, as she attempted yet again to talk to me, I decided to give her a taste of the consequences. "Why should I listen to anything you have to say?" I asked, my voice devoid of emotion. "You didn't care when you were lying to me, sneaking around behind my back. So why should I care now?" She was taken aback, caught off guard by my sudden confrontation. I could see the guilt flashing in her eyes, the realization that this wasn't something she could charm her way out of. She stammered, trying to come up with a response, but I held up a hand, cutting her off. "You wanted to play games? Fine. But this time, we're playing by my rules." As I turned and walked away, I could feel her watching me, the confusion and fear settling in. She knew now that I wasn't going to forgive and forget, that I wasn't the person who would simply move on. And this was only the beginning. The real lesson was yet to come. In the days that followed, I continued to make small, deliberate changes, each one nudging her further away from the life she once took for granted. I made sure she could feel her grasp slipping, feel the steady unraveling of her security, just as she had unraveled my trust. At first she tried to act as if nothing had changed. She went about her daily routines, convinced that I would eventually come around, that this was just a phase. But she underestimated how deeply her betrayal had cut. Each day, I watched her become a little more unsettled, her confidence waning. She would catch me staring, and I'd let her see the cold detachment in my eyes, a reminder that she was no longer safe in the illusion of our relationship. One evening, I decided to take it a step further. We were at a small gathering with a few of our mutual friends, people who had known us as a couple for years. She was trying to play the perfect spouse, laughing and engaging as though nothing had happened. But I knew better, and soon, so would everyone else. As she was laughing with one of our friends, I casually mentioned, "Funny how people can wear masks, isn't it? You think you know someone, and then you find out the truth." My words hung in the air, subtle but sharp. I saw her freeze, her laughter dying as she realized the implication of my words. I watched as her eyes darted around, noticing the curious glances from our friends. For the first time, she seemed genuinely worried, her composure slipping. After the gathering, she confronted me, anger and fear mingling in her expression. "What was that about?" she demanded, her voice shaking. I looked at her, unfazed, just sharing a bit of wisdom. "I thought our friends would appreciate it," I replied coolly. "Besides, isn't it true? Masks always slip eventually." She took a step back, her face pale. I could see the gears turning in her mind, the slow realization that I wasn't just going to let this go. But she still tried to save face, to cling to the remnants of her control. "Do you really want to drag other people into this?" she asked, her voice wavering. "You're only making this harder for both of us." I laughed softly, shaking my head. "No, I'm making it harder for you. You brought this on yourself, remember? I'm simply reminding you that actions have consequences." She fell silent, her shoulders sagging as the weight of her choices began to press down on her. This wasn't what she'd expected. She thought she could compartmentalize her actions, keep her betrayal separate from the life we shared. But I was determined to blur those lines, to make sure she understood that she couldn't simply walk away from what she'd done. Each day, her confidence crumbled a little more. She became quieter, her usual charm and easy laughter replaced by tension and uncertainty. I could see the toll it was taking on her. The way she seemed to carry a shadow around with her, weighed down by the knowledge of what she'd done, and the reality of what it had cost her. And I wasn't done yet. This was only the beginning. Every calculated move I made seemed to chip away at her confidence, and the satisfaction that came with watching her unravel only fueled my resolve. She had once seemed so sure of herself, so comfortable in the double life she'd constructed. Now, that same confidence was eroding, replaced by a quiet desperation I could see every time our eyes met. One evening, as she tried once again to initiate a conversation, I could tell she was on the verge of breaking. She hesitated in the doorway, watching me, as if hoping for a sign of forgiveness or warmth. But I gave her none. "Is this how it's going to be?" she finally asked, her voice barely a whisper. She was no longer the bold, carefree woman she had once been. Now, she was a shadow of herself, haunted by the choices she had made. "Are you just going to keep pushing me away?" I looked up, meeting her gaze with cold detachment. "You made your choice, remember," I said, each word steady and unyielding. "You were the one who decided to betray everything we built, and now you're facing the consequences." Her shoulders slumped, and I could see the fight draining out of her. She wanted forgiveness, a chance to explain, to redeem herself somehow. But I wasn't interested in her redemption. She had crossed a line, and there was no going back. The final part of my plan was approaching, and it would be the most painful yet. I knew it had to be something she would never forget, a moment that would leave an indelible mark. She would come to realize that actions, no matter how well hidden, always surface. Betrayal never comes without a price. I let her sit with that silence, the weight of it pressing down on her, leaving her to confront the emptiness she had created. This was the lesson she would carry, one that would remind her of what she had lost and the choices that had led her here. She tried one last time, reaching out, her voice choked with regret. "I'm sorry," she whispered, barely audible. I looked at her, unflinching. "Sorry doesn't change what you did." With that, I left her standing there, alone with the realization that her apologies could never mend the wounds she'd caused. In the days that followed, I kept my distance, watching as the reality of her actions closed in around her. Each moment of silence, each instance where I withheld the comfort she once took for granted, became part of her reckoning. She was living in a world of her own making now, surrounded by the emptiness and regret she had created. She tried reaching out to friends, but it was clear they sensed something was off. My subtle hints, the carefully placed truths I'd shared, had taken root. Slowly they began to see her in a new light, questioning the sincerity of the person they thought they knew. Her circle was shrinking, and with it, her sense of security. One evening, she made a last, desperate attempt to salvage whatever remained of our relationship. She approached me, her face drawn, eyes rimmed with a sadness that almost seemed genuine. For a moment, I almost felt a flicker of sympathy. But then I remembered the lies, the betrayal, the hurt she had inflicted without a second thought. "I know I can't change what I did," she began, her voice trembling. "But can't we find a way to move past this?" I met her gaze, my expression unreadable. "Move past this," I repeated, letting the words hang in the air. "Do you really think it's that simple?" Her shoulders sagged, and I could see the hopelessness in her eyes. She was finally beginning to understand that forgiveness was not something she could simply request and receive. Trust wasn't a game, and loyalty wasn't something to be toyed with. "You broke something that can't be fixed," I continued, my voice steady, each word a reminder of the consequences she had brought upon herself. "This isn't about me moving past it. It's about you living with the choices you made." She looked away, unable to meet my gaze. The weight of her regret was clear, but it was too little, too late. She had shown me who she truly was, and I had learned my lesson well. This wasn't about revenge anymore, it was about finding peace, and I had finally found it. With one last look, I turned away, leaving her in the silence of a life forever changed by her own actions. The time had finally come for her to face the consequences of her actions. Every calculated move I'd made, every ounce of patience I'd shown, had led to this night. She thought my distance was just a phase that I'd eventually forgive and move on. But tonight, she was about to learn how wrong she'd been. I called her to meet me at a place that once held meaning for us, our favorite overlook with a view of the city lights, where we had made countless promises. She arrived, looking hesitant, as though sensing something different in the air. When her eyes met mine, there was an almost pleading look, as if hoping for some sign of the warmth I used to feel for her. But my expression gave nothing away. "Why here?" she asked, glancing around. Her voice was soft, uncertain, as though she felt the gravity of the moment before I even spoke. It felt fitting, I replied, my tone cold, each word weighted. "This is where we talked about our future, about trust. Thought it was the right place to remind you of what you've broken." She flinched, guilt flashing across her face. I could tell she was trying to read my expression, searching for some indication of how this conversation would end. She opened her mouth, no doubt ready to make excuses, but I held up my hand. "You don't get to justify this," I said, my voice cutting through the silence. "You made your choice, betrayed everything we built together. And now, you're going to face that truth." She shrank under my gaze, but managed to speak, her voice barely a whisper. "I know I hurt you, and I can't take it back, but can we find a way to move past this?" I laughed, a bitter, humorless sound that echoed in the night air. "Move past it," I repeated. "You think this is something we can just brush under the rug? After months of lies and deceit, you think a few words will make it right?" Her face paled, and I could see her carefully crafted composure start to crumble. She was beginning to understand that forgiveness wasn't an option. My patience, my willingness to overlook her betrayal, had long since run out. She tried again, her voice choked with emotion. "I never meant for it to get this far. I was lost." "Lost?" I echoed, feeling a surge of anger rise within me. "No, you weren't lost. You were selfish. You thought you could have everything without paying the price. But there's always a price." She looked away, her shoulders slumping under the weight of her regret. For the first time, I saw genuine fear in her eyes, a fear that she couldn't manipulate or charm her way out of this. The realization was settling in, and with it, the understanding that she'd lost everything. I took a step closer, my voice low and steady. "You wanted to play games, didn't you? You wanted to see how far you could push before everything fell apart. Well, you succeeded. Here we are, at the end." Her eyes filled with tears, and she reached out, desperate. "Please. Can't we start over? I made a mistake, but I'll do whatever it takes to fix this. I need you." But it was too late for apologies, too late for remorse. The damage was done, and she had no one to blame but herself. I watched her, unflinching, as she realized that her pleas fell on deaf ears. "You need me," I repeated, a hint of irony in my voice. "You needed me when you were lying, deceiving, destroying everything we built. You needed me then, but you chose to betray me instead." She opened her mouth, searching for words, but found none. The silence was deafening, filled with the weight of every lie, every betrayal. There was no going back. I let out a slow breath, feeling the finality of this moment settle over us. "This is your consequence," I said quietly, my voice devoid of emotion. "You've lost the life you took for granted. You've lost the trust you thought was unbreakable." Her face crumpled, and I could see the regret, the realization of what she had done and what she had thrown away. She stood there, broken, and for a moment I almost felt pity. But I knew that was what she was hoping for, a way back, a second chance. And that was something I couldn't give her. I turned, leaving her standing there in the silence, her world collapsing around her. As I walked away, I felt an overwhelming sense of closure, as though I was finally free from the weight of her betrayal. She would live with the memory of this night, a permanent reminder of her choices. And for the first time since discovering the truth, I felt peace. As I walked away that night, leaving her alone with the remnants of what we once shared, a sense of calm washed over me. The past few weeks had been a whirlwind of emotions: hurt, betrayal, anger. But now, for the first time, there was nothing but silence. No more unanswered questions, no more lingering doubts. Just the quiet, satisfying peace of finally putting it all behind me. The days that followed were strange. It felt as though I was relearning who I was, redefining my life without her in it. There had been a time when every thought, every decision, revolved around us, around our future together. But now, that version of my life felt distant, like a book one read long ago and left on a forgotten shelf. Initially I thought I would feel a void, a gaping hole where she once was. After all, she had been such an integral part of my life, woven into every routine, every memory. But surprisingly, there was no void, no sense of loss. Instead, there was a newfound freedom, a chance to reclaim myself, to rediscover the parts of me that had been overshadowed by the relationship. I began focusing on myself, something I hadn't done in a long time. I revisited old hobbies, picked up new ones, and spent time with friends I hadn't seen in ages. Each day felt like a step forward, a small victory over the pain that had once consumed me. Slowly I could feel myself healing, shedding the hurt she had left behind. One evening, I found myself going through old photographs. They were filled with memories of happier times, moments when I believed our love was unbreakable. But as I looked closer, I saw the signs, the subtle ways in which I had compromised myself for the sake of the relationship. I saw moments where I had brushed aside my own needs, ignored my instincts, all because I had been so focused on making her happy. In those pictures I saw a version of myself that had been willing to sacrifice anything to keep her by my side. And now, with the clarity of distance, I understood that this betrayal hadn't just been her choice. I had played a role, too, by ignoring the parts of myself that deserved more. I realized that the peace I felt now wasn't just because I had walked away from her, it was because I had finally chosen to put myself first. As the weeks turned into months, I continued building this new version of my life. The pain of her betrayal faded, replaced by a quiet gratitude for the lessons I had learned. I no longer felt anger toward her, only a sense of detachment. She was a chapter in my life, one that had taught me resilience, strength, and the importance of self-respect. Friends noticed the change in me, commenting on how much lighter I seemed, how I was laughing more, genuinely enjoying life again. It was true. For the first time in years, I felt whole. I wasn't relying on anyone else for happiness, wasn't looking for validation or approval. I had learned to find those things within myself, and it was liberating. Occasionally I would see reminders of her, things we had shared, places we had visited together. But those memories no longer held power over me. They were just echoes of a past life, fragments that had no bearing on the person I had become. She had once been the center of my world, but now, she was just another lesson learned, a reminder of how far I had come. One day I ran into an old mutual friend who mentioned, almost hesitantly, that she had moved on too. I could see him watching me closely, perhaps expecting a reaction, but all I felt was indifference. She was free to live her life, just as I was free to live mine. Her choices were no longer my concern, her happiness or pain irrelevant to my journey. In that moment, I realized just how much I had healed. The person who had once been devastated by her betrayal, who had spent sleepless nights consumed by anger and hurt, was gone. I had rebuilt myself, piece by piece, stronger and more resilient than ever. She had left scars, yes, but they were a testament to my strength. A reminder of what I had overcome. The experience had changed me, molded me into someone who valued honesty, loyalty, and self-respect above all else. I knew I would never again allow someone to make me feel small, to take my trust for granted. I had learned to set boundaries, to protect my heart without losing my capacity to love. Looking back, I could see the path I had traveled, the lessons each step had taught me. The betrayal, the confrontation, the slow process of healing, all of it had led me to this moment, this sense of peace. I was no longer haunted by the past, no longer burdened by the weight of her choices. As I moved forward, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. Life was open before me, filled with possibilities I hadn't seen before. I was no longer defined by the relationship, no longer tied to the mistakes and hurt that had once threatened to break me. I was free, truly free, to create a future on my own terms. In the end, her betrayal had given me a gift, a chance to rediscover myself, to build a life rooted in self-respect and strength. I had walked through the fire, faced the pain, and emerged on the other side, whole and unbroken. This was my life, my story, and I would live it with the clarity and confidence I had fought so hard to gain. As time passed, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought me to this point, and I felt a growing sense of pride, not for having been hurt, not for the betrayal itself, but for the way I had handled it, for the strength I had found within myself. There was a time when I thought I'd never recover, when the thought of moving on seemed impossible, but I had come out of it stronger, with a renewed understanding of my own resilience. I began focusing on things I'd neglected during our relationship, things that had once brought me joy but had slowly faded away as I became consumed with maintaining our life together. I rediscovered my passion for hiking, spending weekends exploring trails and losing myself in the quiet of nature. Each step forward felt like a small triumph, a reminder of how far I had come. The people around me could see the difference too. Friends who had once been worried about me now saw a side of me that hadn't been there before. I was more confident, more assured, and far less willing to settle for anything less than what I deserved. Conversations flowed more easily, laughter came naturally, and the weight of my past no longer hovered over every interaction. One evening, while I was at a gathering with friends, I realized just how much I had changed. Someone asked me about relationships, about trust and forgiveness, and instead of feeling bitterness or pain, I found myself answering with a calm, open perspective. I shared what I had learned not just about betrayal, but about the importance of self-respect and boundaries, about valuing oneself enough to walk away from anything that doesn't bring peace. In that moment, I realized I no longer felt defined by what had happened. The betrayal had been a part of my journey, yes, but it wasn't the whole story. It was just one chapter, a lesson that had shaped me, but not something that controlled my future. As more time passed, I began setting new goals for myself. I enrolled in courses I had always wanted to take, picked up skills I had put off for too long, and embraced opportunities that allowed me to grow and evolve. With each new achievement, I felt a renewed sense of purpose, a drive to continue building a life that was fulfilling and authentic. There were still moments, of course, when memories surfaced. Certain places, certain songs, or even passing thoughts would remind me of her, of what we once had and what was lost. But those memories no longer held power over me. They were simply remnants of a past life, pieces of a story that had reached its conclusion. I acknowledged them, allowed myself to feel whatever emotions came up, and then let them go. One day, while reflecting on everything that had happened, I realized I felt gratitude not for the betrayal, but for the clarity it had brought me. It had shown me my own strength, my capacity to heal and grow, and my ability to create a life of my own. I had found peace not by forgetting, but by embracing the lessons I had learned, and using them as a foundation for the person I had become. In the end, her betrayal had freed me in ways I hadn't anticipated. It had stripped away illusions, forcing me to confront truths I had once ignored, and in doing so, it had given me the gift of self-awareness, a deeper understanding of what I wanted and needed in life. I came to see that true happiness wasn't found in someone else's validation or approval, but in the quiet contentment that came from living authentically, from honoring my own values and boundaries. This journey had taught me that I was enough, that I didn't need to compromise or settle to be whole. I was complete on my own, and that realization was more powerful than any relationship could ever be. As I moved forward, I carried this newfound wisdom with me, a guiding light that would shape every decision, every relationship, and every chapter of my life. I was free, truly free, to live on my own terms, to embrace each day with a sense of purpose and joy. And for the first time, I knew that no matter what challenges came my way, I had the strength to face them. I had survived the storm, and I had emerged stronger, more resilient, and more at peace than I had ever been. As I moved forward with my life, each step a testament to my resilience, I felt a profound sense of peace. The journey had been difficult, filled with pain and unexpected lessons, but I had emerged stronger, grounded in the knowledge of who I was and what I deserved. In reclaiming myself, I had discovered a life far richer and more fulfilling than anything I could have imagined before. If this story resonates with you, if you've ever found yourself lost in the aftermath of betrayal, remember this: healing and growth are possible. You are stronger than you know, capable of rebuilding, of rediscovering your own strength and purpose. Subscribe to this channel for more stories of resilience and transformation, because sometimes, the hardest experiences bring the greatest clarity.